I worked at Papa John's for a couple years at the end of high school. And beginning of college, I delivered pizzas and sometimes helped with cleaning and stuff because I worked nights. This was my normal 4 to 1 shift on a slow weekday by 10. We weren't getting any orders, so we started cleaning and preparing for closing so we could leave right at 11. But at 10:45, the store phone started ringing. I let my manager pick it up, and from hearing what he was saying, I knew someone was placing an order. Despite my shift ending in 15 minutes, I still had to deliver the order. So I was visibly annoyed. I waited for the pizza to be ready, then left just before 11. The address wasn't too far, I think just under 10 minutes away. But when I got there, I was a little bit confused. There was a long driveway going into the trees, but I couldn't see any houses or lights at the end. I looked back at the map, zooming in and seeing that there was a house. It was just really far down. I turned onto the driveway and put my brights on after the first part that connected to the main road. It became a gravel path and was honestly hard to follow because it was thin, and the trees were really close to the sides. Eventually it opened up a bit, and across a small field was an old wooden house. It was too big to be a cabin, but it definitely was giving off that middle-of-the-woods cabin-type feeling. There wasn't exactly a place to park, so I just stopped in the ground travel and got out. A few of the outdoor lights were on, but they were not bright at all, and most of the woods surrounding the area were completely dark. I started walking up to the door, hoping to do this quickly because something was starting to make me feel off about this place. I got up to the porch, and just before I knocked, I heard something behind me. It was leaves crunching in the woods near the gravel driveway that I just come from. I looked out there for a second, but it was too dark to see anything, so I turned back and knocked on the door while I waited. I looked back at my car, wishing I'd left the keys inside so the headlights would stay on. Even from the porch, it was hard to see any more than just a small glare coming from the plastic reflectors. The rest of the car was not visible, falling past the dim light coming from the house. I heard footsteps inside, then the door opened. It was an old man with short black hair and glazed-over eyes. "I have a Papa John's pizza order for you," I said, holding out the box. There was a slight pause before the man slowly reached out and took it. Looking me in the eyes the whole time, he set it down on a table next to him and got his wallet out, slowly counting through some cash. When I heard it again, leaves crunching behind me. I looked over my shoulder toward my car where I heard it coming from. But just when I thought I might have seen something, the man grabbed my shoulder. "Here for you," he said, holding out some cash. I took it, then quickly looked back at my car but didn't see anything, and a few seconds later, I was shaken by the man slamming the door behind me before leaving the porch. I got my phone out and turned the flashlight on, then hurried back to my car, shining the light in all directions but not seeing anything. I got in and made a small U-turn, then drove out of there. My unsettling feelings stayed with me the whole drive back, and after clocking out, I did a quick walk around of my car. For the most part, everything looked okay, but once I got a closer look, I noticed some scratches near the passenger door handle that I didn't remember being there. Before, I couldn't verify anything though, and even if I could, I don't think there's really anything I could do. But I think someone was out there in the woods trying to get into my car without me knowing. Maybe it was all just a setup. I can't really say for sure, but if they had gotten in, there's a chance they would have hid in the backseat and waited for me. What would happen after that is best left unknown. It was a typical Friday after my college classes were out, and I was spending the night doing DoorDash. This was my regular routine, dashing on the weekends to help me pay for all my living expenses while on campus. The night started, well, getting a lot of orders done and making a good amount, and then it hit a stalemate after the big dinner rush. Very few orders were showing up, and the ones that did, they were very low paying. Basically waste of time orders. But then after an hour of aimlessly driving around, an order came through that wasn't too bad. It was 8M away, but the payment was well worth it. It was nothing absurd, but enough to make it not a rip-off, like a lot of the other ones were. I accepted the order and ran into the restaurant to grab the bag, then hopped to my car and started driving. The map said it would take 30 minutes, which I think was the longest of any orders I'd done up until this point. Most of the houses were right around campus, because any further than 15 to 20 minutes out, it becomes pretty much just bare fields of grass. As I got to that 20-minute mark, it became just that very few houses, mostly sitting far out in fields of crops and nothing Nothing else. The rest of the 10-minute drive was on this empty road going along these farms. Then I made it to the house. There was a dirt driveway connecting to the road leading through a large field, and in the far back was a small house. Driving through the field felt very eerie. Even though I'm not one to get nervous without reason, this felt different. As I got further out from the road, the only sound was the low rumbling of my car on the dirt. I parked out front and got the bag ready, then left the car on as I stepped out. The night was quiet, and the house was dark. Having only the porch light on to illuminate the outside, I walked through the unkempt grass and up to the porch, knocking on the door as I waited. I looked back at my car sitting in the dark with the field of pitch black behind it. A moment went by. Then I knocked again, but there was no response. Not even the sound of anyone inside. It didn't take long for me to realize the strangeness of the situation, seeing no lights on in the windows, and noticing how decayed the house looked up close. The only thing that made me think it couldn't be abandoned was that I had an order for this address and the porch light was on. I looked at the light, thinking why would that be the only light? But by some odd chance, I happened to recognize the top portion of the casing having a cheap solar battery. It was just an automatic light that charges during the day and turns on in the evening, meaning nobody had to be here to turn it on. Just as I was piecing this all together, though I heard a rumbling sound behind me, I turned, seeing a car driving down the dirt path and coming up right behind my car. I stood there and stared at their headlights until a man stepped out. I yelled from the porch asking if this was his order, but he didn't reply. He just stood right next to his car and didn't move or speak. I felt my adrenaline spike as I began realizing how horrible the situation likely was. The silence of the night only reminded me that there was nobody here to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field between an empty house and a stranger. In a split-second instinctual reaction, I dropped the bag and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I looked back. Seeing the man coming up behind me frantically, I continued running, and the further route I got, the thicker and taller the grass became until it was covering all views of direction. By then I knew the guy had no chance in following me. I slowed down, catching my breath as I carefully moved through the crops and tried to be quiet in case the man was still trying to find me. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there, I got to a road where I had enough signal to call for help. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course the man was gone. By then I was surprised, though, because my car hadn't been looted, and the bag of food was still on the porch of the abandoned house, but that could only mean that the man had other intentions, likely far worse than just robbing me. I'm a local truck driver for a common grocery store in our city. This means I stay in the same 50-ish mile radius and drive between the warehouse and several stores every day to deliver pallets of groceries. I don't have to make any drives more than 2 hours long, so every night I get to go home at a reasonable time and sleep in my own bed, rather than at a truck stop. Like most cross-country or regional truckers have to this day, was pretty average, going between a few stores and delivering the pallets, and I got to my last delivery location around 9. It took a half hour for them to empty the trailer, but then I was good to head back to the warehouse and turn in for the night. This was always the farthest drive, though, being that the warehouse was on the edge of the city, away from everything, an hour into the drive, and about when I reached 15 minutes away, I pulled into a gas station to fill up. As I'd been riding on empty for probably too long, I went into the diesel section and started the gas pump while I leaned against the truck and waited. I saw a group standing outside of a parked pickup truck on the other side of the gas station. They were the only ones there, but they kept eyeing me. Looking over at both me and my truck, it was odd. But I thought they were just waiting for me to leave, probably so they could do something stupid without any bystanders. Once my truck was full, I put the pump back and got in, driving out of the gas station. As I did, the group got into their pickup and left as well, pulling up right behind me. Now it was definitely more than just odd. I still didn't know exactly what they were planning to do, but they weren't even trying to hide it over the next mile. As we got further out toward the edge of the city, they kept swerving around behind me, going in and out of the lane and unable to keep a consistent speed. I got my phone from the mount and called the police to report the group for reckless and possibly drunk driving. Being in a huge semi, I didn't feel unsafe, but I was more worried for anyone else that may be on the road after a couple more minutes, though. They swerved into the lane next to me and sped up until they were right across from my window. I looked down at them, seeing a few guys looking at me and saying something to the others. Then they sped up again and slammed on the brakes right in front of me. I had no choice then to brake as well, stopping just before ramming into them. As soon as I did, all the doors swung open, and 4 of them came running to either side of my truck trying to open the doors and get in. I immediately went in, reversed, trying to put some distance between us before I put it back in drive. My only choices were to take a chance at driving off the road, which might make my trailer topple over, or I could ram through their pickup. Obviously, I went straight through their truck. All 4 of them ran off the road just before I hit it, and after 30 seconds, I was long gone. By the time I got to the warehouse, police had shown up to the scene, finding their pickup on the side of the road, and all 4 of them standing by it, as the officer put it. They were all intoxicated but not willing to cooperate in explaining what they were doing, whatever they were trying to do. It was pretty scary having 4 drunk and aggressive guys trying to break into my truck, although it all happened so fast and maybe doesn't seem that bad. I think if I'd not acted so quickly, it easily could have escalated to something truly awful, but there's really no way to know what could have happened. I work for my dad at his small construction business. He runs a yard and warehouse full of materials, as well as manages the job sites the workers are at. Since I was only 17 at the time, my job was to basically be the errand boy. I'd drive materials back and forth and pick up anything that was needed, depending on the job. Though some materials would need to be there before workers arrived, because they would need them, so they could get to work right away in the morning. So every once in a while during busy weeks, I'd have to start work really early, like 2 or 3 a.m., to make sure I could drop everything off in time. Obviously, this was only during the summer when I didn't have school, so I really had no excuse for not being able to work. I liked doing the deliveries early, though, because it was calm, and I didn't have to deal with anyone telling me what to do on this day. I arrived at the warehouse at 3 a.m. and loaded up, then started making my way to the job site. It was a repair job on an old, maybe even abandoned building at the edge of our town. When I got there, I saw a truck parked right outside. Its lights were off, and it didn't look like anyone was nearby. It was way too early for anyone to be working, so I wasn't expecting to see any cars here. I parked and got out, walking up to it and seeing that it wasn't a company vehicle either. The windows were tinted and I couldn't see inside. I turned and looked at the building, trying to see if anyone was here. I called out, asking if anyone was inside, but got no response. Feeling a little weird about it, I pulled out my phone and called my dad. It rang for a minute, then went to voicemail, figuring it was probably just a worker's personal truck that they'd left there. I went back to my truck and started unloading the materials. It took probably an hour. Then I got back in and started to drive off. As I left the area, though, I looked in my rearview mirror and suddenly the truck's lights turned on. I practically slammed on my brakes, stopping on the side of the road, and watching as the truck started to back out. Someone was in there the whole time, knowing that I was sure that I couldn't have been a worker because they definitely would have responded to me. I sat and watched as they made their way out of the parking area and onto the road. I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed my dad's phone number again, while I waited for him to pick up. I looked over, seeing the truck had stopped right next to me. I stared at their window, knowing someone behind it was probably staring at me. I tossed my phone on the seat and started to drive forward, but the truck was quick to match my speed and prevent me from getting back onto the road. But there was nowhere else for me to go. To my left were trees, and to my right was this truck blocking my way. I started to panic. Putting the car in reverse and trying to back up, the truck did the same until they tapped to the side of my car, making me lose control and slide completely off the shoulder and hit the side of a tree. The truck quickly stopped right at the top of the road as if they were going to get out. But then their brake light suddenly turned off again as they put it back in drive and sped away. Just 20 seconds later, another car pulled up to the side of the road and a man got out and ran up to me asking if I was okay. I didn't know his name at the time, but it was one of the workers that was just arriving at the job site. He only saw the last bit of what happened, but said he recognized the other truck as Samuel's, who was another worker. My dad had hired a few months ago. As it turned out, a bunch of tools and materials were missing from the job site, adding up to almost $10,000, and that's only from that one night. He could have been slowly stealing a few things at a time over the past few months. I think what happened that night, though, was that Samuel thought that by me seeing his truck it would eventually all get traced back to him and he'd get caught, so he tried to stop me. I don't know what he would have done to me, but considering I was the only witness, it's likely that he wouldn't have gotten caught as long as I was never seen again, unfortunately, though his name and everything else didn't add up to anything. And it was likely he was either an illegal immigrant or some kind of felon that went through the effort of getting fake or stolen IDs and work documents. I was never expecting something like that to ever happen, but at least it's really unlikely that I'll ever see that man again. I had some spare time this night, and having chugged a few coffees earlier in the day, I figured I'd use this energy to go out and make some money I was delivering for DoorDash. Cruising on the highway to my next delivery, it was super late. The roads were empty and the night was very peaceful, basically every delivery driver's dream on my way there, though. My phone started buzzing. It was the customer calling me, but before I had a chance to answer it, they hung up. Since it only rang for a couple seconds, I thought it must have been an accident, but in case not, I redialed their number. It rang for a while, but they didn't answer. I shook my head and blew it off. Not thinking about it for the rest of the drive, I got off the highway and drove into the neighborhood. It was a very regular street with average houses. When I got up to the house my delivery was for, I parked right in the driveway and started walking up to their porch. As I was setting down the bag, I saw that the front door was cracked open. I didn't know if it was meant for me or not, so I just lightly knocked on the door and called out that I was dropping off their food as soon as I did. I heard a somewhat disturbing sound come from down the hallway. It was a muffled thump that almost mimicked my knocking, like someone was banging on a door a bit shaken. I opened the front door wider and called out again. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just repeated myself that I was delivering their food. A few quiet moments went by. Then I heard a door open from the back of the house, and a guy came around the corner. He looked distressed and bothered, but I couldn't tell if it was because of me or something else. The guy walked down the hall and right up to the doorway I was in, not saying a word as he started to reach for the bag, but that's when I heard those thumps again from down the hallway. I looked past him in confusion as he turned and looked as well, then quickly turned back and looked at me, recognizing that I heard it too. "Is everything okay?" I asked carefully. The sound echoed through the walls again, as the man just kind of stared at me as if he were trying to think of what to do. "Why don't you bring the food inside for me?" he said, almost in a demanding tone, nervously. I picked up the bag, but quickly realized how terrible of an idea this was. I felt threatened, like I had to follow him. But I also had a feeling that if I did, I wouldn't be making it out of there. In my hesitation, the guy's face showed. He was even more bothered, angry. Even he then reached out and grabbed the food right from my hands, then slammed the door in my face. Stunned, I stood there and listened as his footsteps went down the hallway and the thumping stopped. I couldn't do anything else at this point, so I hurried off the porch and got my car. I ended my DoorDash after that one and ended up reporting the really disturbing scenario to the police. I think what ended up making me report it was that the man tried to get me to go inside his house. If not for that, I may have not felt there was enough evidence to get me to do anything. Unfortunately, though, police informed me hours later that the man declined that anyone else was there and declined their request to search his home. At that point, there was nothing left to do other than speculate. I believe there was something truly horrible going on, and he was possibly ready to do the same to me, but I don't think we'll ever know for sure. I was delivering a truckload to a company on the far west coast coming from the east coast. The route across the country is one I've taken many times before, being a truck driver for almost 20 years. It's always the same. Every time I make one of these drives. Same roads, same truck stops, and same everything over these 20 years. Though I've never really had anything crazy happen, I've had a few odd scenarios, but they never amounted to anything. So when I was driving this routes again, I had no worries in my mind. It was just another day on the job. About 20 hours into the route, a storm started coming over and slowing down my driving. It was late too, so by then I was already looking for the next truck stop to sleep at as I drove. Though a very sudden light appeared behind me. The road I was on was flat and straight, so I would have seen them coming in my mirror, but it was all of a sudden that they were right behind me. Maybe they had just turned on their lights or something, I didn't know. but they very quickly came right up to the back. I kept my eyes on them until they got so close that they were completely covered by the trailer. All I could see were their headlights reflecting off the back, but then their lights shut off. I maintained my speed and kept looking back at my mirrors, trying to see if they were still behind me. But I had no way to know for someone to turn off their lights in the middle of a heavy storm. Was insane, though. And to be tailing behind me so close was just as insane. Thankfully, a sign showed a truck stop was only 5 miles ahead. So at least I knew I was close to getting away from whatever this was. I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on just some weird behavior. But as a trucker, it's hard not to think about the possibility of it being an attempted robbery, especially when alone on the road at night. For the rest of the 5 miles, I saw no signs of them behind me. I was still on edge because I couldn't really see anything anyway, but I started feeling less worried. As I was coming in on the truck stop, I pulled in, trying to check my mirrors to see if they followed, but with the rain and lack of lighting, it was really too hard to tell. The truck stop was mostly empty, though. Aside from a few trucks at the gas pumps, I pulled off to the side and parked in the middle of the lot after waiting a minute and getting some of my stuff organized. I opened the truck door and leaned my head out, looking along the side of the trailer. I was drenched from the rain in just a matter of seconds, but from what I could tell, there was no car behind me. I closed the door and finally felt a bit of relief grabbing my pillow and blanket from the passenger side. I locked the doors, turned off the truck, and tried to get some shoya. The rain pounding on the metal roof made it easy to fall asleep, blocking out any possible sounds coming from other trucks pulling in and out when I woke up. Though I felt I had only been asleep for a few minutes. I looked around, seeing it was still dark out and the storm was the same if not worse, but before I could check my mirrors, a loud thump shook the truck. My eyes opened wider. I reached for the door handle and opened it. Looking out at the back of the trailer through the rain, I could barely see the outline of a car with its headlights off, and 2 men moving around in front of it, terrified. I hesitated to step out and confront them, and as I sat there in that moment of hesitation, the door suddenly slammed against my body, shoving me back further into the driver's seat. Another man stood outside yelling at me to stay where I was, then slamming the door again. His right hand was shoved in his hoodie, and with 2 other men behind the truck, I was in no position to try anything. I could feel the truck shake as I just sat in place with the guy outside my door, watching my every move. He didn't even look away for a second. This went on for a few minutes, then they ran back to their car and drove off. I was still in shock, watching their car disappear onto the road. I called the police and put in a report, but no information ever came up on who the men were. All I know is that if I had been any less aware and had just tried to drive off at first sight of the men, I probably wouldn't have been able to make it out as safely as I did. I used to deliver Chinese food for a local restaurant. I was just a teenager in high school at the time, and whatever job I got wasn't going to be for more than a year or 2. I'd say this job was fairly typical to most first jobs or retail and food service jobs because it had some slow and boring days and some busy and stressful days as the delivery driver. Though I was always thankful to not have to be working in the store and dealing with mobs of customers on this night. I started at 6 p.m. It was a Friday, so I was working a late 6 to 12 shift as soon as I clocked in. I was delivering orders nonstop for the next 2 hours with no time to breathe in between them. At 8, orders were slowing a bit, but I still had a few more to deliver before I could take my lunch, so I grabbed the 3 orders and set out to get them done before 9. The first one was close, but the next 2 were further out. This isn't uncommon as our town isn't all packed together. I got to the second house and dropped it off, then headed out to the final stop. It was 10 minutes from where I was, and the tag said it wasn't paid for yet. All I was thinking about during this drive was the break I'd get afterward, going back and forth for 3 hours straight. Tired me out more than usual. This night I pulled into the neighborhood and followed the GPS until I got to a back portion, where the whole atmosphere quickly changed. I turned down on a thin road of cracked pavement and potholes with barely visible small houses on the side, covered by the thick bushes and unkempt lawns. When the GPS told me I'd arrived, I stopped the car but didn't see a house. I turned my brights on, and ever so faintly I could see the outline of a small house pretty far from the road I was on. I then looked at the grass leading up to it and realized there was actually a driveway. It was just engulfed in vines and tall grass. I would never have seen it if I hadn't seen the house first, knowing I would be unable to even drive on it. I put the car in park and got out with the bag, then began to walk through the overgrown driveway. I couldn't believe how awful it was to walk through, and I couldn't imagine anyone letting their driveway get to this point. Getting closer, though, I could see more of the house. It was very small, kind of like a trailer home, and looked to be in a matching condition to the driveway. Vines growing over the windows and bushes covering every inch of the nearly decaying house. As I made my way up to the front door, I knew something was wrong. I knew it in my gut and in my head, but I was just some kid with a first job that was scared to lose it. So I felt like I had to do my job, which was to deliver the order to this address. I pushed all my bad feelings aside and knocked on the door right away. I heard footsteps coming up to the door. It opened, revealing a young lady behind it at first, in the dim lighting. She looked very normal, and I felt a huge relief. But it only took a few more seconds to realize that her normal look was eerily out of place with the house. In this condition, there was no way she could be so well dressed and taken care of. As these thoughts scrambled through my head, she opened the screen door and said in a creepily calm tone, "Come in." Everything hid me in that moment as I stumbled back a few steps and decided that I needed to leave right away. I turned around, and only a second after beginning to leave, I heard a thud from the side of the house. I looked over, seeing two men running out from behind the house and sprinting through the bushes toward me. I dropped everything and started running. I did everything I could to get through the thick grass and vines, but just as I reached the end of the driveway, I stumbled to the ground, tripping over something. I hurried up, hearing their footsteps closing the distance on me. I couldn't even get myself to look back as I ran straight into my car, turning it on. The men immediately stopped and ran back to where they came from. With my whole body still shaking from the adrenaline, I turned the car around and drove away. Of course, I let my boss know what happened, and he urged me to call the police and report it. I was really relieved to know he didn't care about the order and only for my safety, which, looking back on it, it would have been horrible. If it were any other way, police interviewed me and my boss and did a whole investigation, ultimately unable to find any of the people. The property I was on, though, was actually state-owned, and the trespassing sign at the beginning of the road had been dug up and thrown into the tall grass. Their intentions are unknown, but it seems like the most obvious possibility is likely the answer. I just hope nobody else has to go through what I did, or if they do, I hope they can be as lucky as I was to get away. I hope they can be. This happened during a road trip I was taking on the way back from seeing my family for the holidays. I'm not usually one to drive more than a couple hours because I much prefer flying. But this year, the tickets to where I was going were way more expensive for some reason. It would have cost me over $1,000 for a round-trip flight that only went a few states over. I had planned everything out so that I'd get home a few days before I had to go to work. But a snowstorm blew in on the day I was going to leave, so I had to stay an extra 2 days before finally starting the drive. The roads were empty since it was past the holiday rush, and most of the drive is pretty out of the way from the big cities. The hardest part of it was always staying awake and fighting the boredom. The first 8 or so hours went by without any trouble, though sure I was tired, but the snow on the road kept me awake and attentive. It was about 10 p.m., and I had a hotel booked in a small town just 2 hours further ahead, but as I drove, a small light came up in my mirror. It was the headlights of someone behind me, which was actually the first person I'd seen on the road with me in over an hour. Their lights were getting bigger quickly, though, showing that they were coming up really fast. And soon I could see that it was actually a large van of some kind. It was only a one-lane road, so I couldn't get out of their way, but I figured they would still swerve around me given they were going so fast once they reached the back of my car, though they matched my speed and stayed behind me after a few seconds. I realized they weren't trying to get around me, and we drove like that for almost 10 minutes. It was kind of unnerving, being that it was only us on the road, and yet this huge van was trailing right behind me. It wasn't a normal following distance either. They were so close that I couldn't even see their front bumper or license plate in my mirror. Maybe I was quick to feel uneasy about it, but an exit came up for a gas station, and I chose to turn off, hoping they would stay on the road and that I could put some distance between us. But as I veered off and down the exit ramp, they stayed right behind me. I pulled into the gas station and parked at one of the pumps as the van pulled into the pump behind me. At this point, I just didn't know what was happening. Part of me thought that this was something bad, but another part of me thought I was just overreacting. I knew that this was the only gas station in the past 30-ish minutes, so it wasn't all that unlikely that they would also need gas before getting out to fill up my tank. I shut my car off and looked around the store. Part of the gas station had its lights off and a closed sign hanging from the door. I looked to the sides of it, seeing nothing but empty darkness. No houses, no buildings, just a field covered in snow with a single road going through it. I looked at my mirror. A man was now standing outside of the van and putting gas in, so I got out and began doing the same as the numbers slowly ticked on the gas meter. The man quickly put his pump back and sealed his gas cap. I looked over, seeing him walking to the back of his van. Then I heard the loud ratcheting sound of the back door being lifted open. There was something in that moment, maybe a gut feeling or just an instinct of some kind, that told me to get out of there. I pulled the pump out of my car, and not even a second later, 3 men were sprinting at me from around the back of the van. I dropped the pump on the ground and quickly got in my car, locking the doors just as one of them grabbed the handle and tried to rip it open. I was shaking and moving as quick as I could to get the car on. All 3 of them went around trying each door, but then immediately sprinted back to their van before I'd even had the chance to pull away when I did. Though I saw them drive away soon after, going in the opposite direction down the way we had come from. I let the police know what happened, but never even got a call back with any updates. I think it's obvious they were trying to abduct people under the cover of night on the vast unpopulated highway. What's terrifying is how confident and, for lack of a better word, professional the whole operation was. It seemed that as soon as they realized I was securely in my car, and it wasn't going to be effortless, they fled the scene without even needing to communicate with each other. It was like they had done it many times before. What would have happened if they gotten me? I don't know. But I urge everyone to learn from my mistakes, because you may not be as lucky as I was. In 2019, I did deliveries for a pizza place near my school. I'd work most days after class so I could afford to pay for my car and rent. It wasn't a great job in any aspect, but it was good enough to get me through college without being completely broke. This night was no different than most in the beginning. I clocked in at 6 a.m. and delivered for 3 hours straight, then took a lunch break and started again at 9:30. I picked up the next order and started heading to the place. The address didn't look like a house, but the route it took me on to get there was not what I was expecting. It took me further out from town, away from most houses and stores, and into a business center. It was an area full of small office buildings and nothing else. I drove down the road and couldn't really tell what any of the addresses were, so I just followed the directions on the GPS and hoped it would take me into the right parking lot. When I turned in, I drove through a pretty long parking area until I reached the front of the building and could read the address. It matched up with the one on the order, but something was off. The parking lot was completely empty. Not even the streetlights were on, and the office building had no signs of anyone being inside. I double-checked the address, thinking there must have been a mistake, but it all checked out. I even tried searching it on Google for any places nearby with the same address, but no, this was it. I set my car in park and got out, glancing around before walking up to the door. It was a glass door with a dark tint covering it. I knocked, then took a step back and waited. It only took a moment before the door opened. It was a middle-aged man wearing very casual clothes and holding a small grin on his face. He suddenly got overly excited and said he was happy. The food had finally arrived and that everyone was hungry. I looked behind him, not seeing anyone else and only a single light on in the middle of the hallway, but I ignored it and just told him his total. He must have realized what I was looking for, though, as he quickly explained that everyone else was in the rec room on the 3rd floor for a company party. I smiled to be polite, but the man was talking with an overwhelming amount of excitement, so much so that it almost felt like he had to be faking it. He pulled out his wallet and handed me cash for the pizzas along with a $10 tip. But as I took the money, he asked me for a favor. He wanted help bringing the pizzas up to the 3rd floor. The man had put me in a strange position, having taken the generous tip already. It felt like it would only be right to help him. On the other hand, though, carrying a few pizzas isn't exactly difficult, and it didn't seem necessary by any means. He started walking without me having answered, yet urging me to follow him as he made his way to a door leading to some stairs. I trailed behind, keeping my distance of following him into the stairwell as I entered, though I felt a cold rush of air and noticed all the lights were off. Only the small light from the hallway lit the entrance to the stairs. The man started making his way up, but stopped. Once he realized I hadn't continued following him. He turned and made a humorous remark about the lights, but his grin was quick to leave once he saw that I wasn't going to follow him anymore. There was no hesitation as he came rushing down toward me with anger in his eyes. I tossed the pizzas on the ground, rushing out of the door and into the hallway, then running for the exit and bolting to my car. I saw the man come partly out of the front doors before going back in and slamming them shut. I immediately called the police after driving to a different parking lot. The man had run off by the time they got there, and since he paid in cash, there was no way to know who he really was. The office building was empty, though, and there was nobody else on the third floor. So it's clear that it was just some sort of trap. What he had ready for me on the third floor is unknown, and I hope that nobody ever has to know. I was driving back from a friend's house who lives an hour away. We lost track of time, so I didn't leave until around 2 a.m. I was really tired and the drive was really boring. Most of the way home was a long straight road that didn't seem to have a single other car on it. For the first 20 minutes, it was just me staring at the endless pavement ahead and trying to not let my eyes shut. But then my headlights suddenly lit something up on the road way ahead of me. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but as I got closer, I had to slow down and eventually stop. There was a semi-truck parked in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes. I sat there for a few seconds, having no clue what I was seeing at this point on the road. We were at least 30 minutes from town, and there was nothing out here. The only reason anyone would stop out here is if there was an emergency. I looked to the right of the truck, and there might have been enough room for me to get around the trailer. But there was a steep hill on the shoulder that would have been really risky to drive on the edge of the other side of the truck. Had trees too close together for me to drive between after being there for a whole minute. I figured this had to be an emergency, and that my best and maybe only option was to check up on them. I got out of my car and began walking up to the front of the trailer. I remember how quiet it was outside, like the night was completely still and empty as I got up to the front, though I realized the light was on in the driver's cabin. I went up to the door and lightly knocked on it, then called out asking if they were okay. The window was way too high up to see through, so I couldn't really see anything from the ground. After a few seconds, there was still no response. I called out again, but there wasn't even the sound of any movement inside. My gut was telling me that something was seriously off about this. I looked down the road ahead, then back at the road I came from, seeing nothing but fog in the distance, which only reminded me how far away I was from anyone else. I grabbed the side of the door and lifted myself up onto the steps, then looked inside the window. There was stuff scattered everywhere, almost looking like they'd crashed or something, and making the whole cabin a total mess. But nobody was inside. Then I noticed the door on the other side was wide open. I stepped back onto the road and began walking around the truck to investigate the open door, but was stopped in my tracks when I saw a man in the forest walking up the side of the hill. He was tall with shoulder-length hair and had a very disheveled appearance. "Hey man, are you okay?" The man didn't look at me but continued coming up from the forest and onto the road. In the faint light coming from my headlights, I saw dark red stains all around his clothes, and his face was covered in dirt and grime, thinking he was clearly not okay. I offered to help, but he continued to not even acknowledge me. That was until I said I could call 911 for him. He immediately stopped walking and shot a look at me, holding eye contact for a few long seconds. "I'm fine," he said in a deep, threatening tone. I stopped talking and watched him get into the truck. Then I rushed back to my car as the truck started driving away. I turned around and drove right back to my friend's house, where I called 911 and gave every detail I could remember. Unsurprisingly, the case never went further than that. What happened on that road is still a mystery, one that still terrifies me. The way the truck was stopped being sideways with the cabin looking as chaotic as it did, I think something or someone forced them to stop. What's happened afterwards is debatable. But the man I saw probably wasn't the original truck driver, and I think we can all assume what likely happened in the forest below the road. Get ready for a roller coaster, so I had this Once I was young and dumb, only just 20. He was 5 years older. Married, had a kid. He was unhappy, a stifled artist or so. I thought his wife was nuts, had stalked him. When they first started dating, poked holes in their condoms, then told him about it and said he had to marry her or she would terminate it, something he was vehemently opposed to. Little did I know how perfect they truly were together. So we start flirting, calling each night, talking through until morning, and at this point we're just friends, but I'm falling. Eventually we confess our feelings, the whole shebang, and then one night wind up at a party with our mutual friends and take a walk around the block. We ended up hooking up on the bleachers of the nearby high school, and then had to hide while we heard all of our friends come looking for us. Daring and exciting. Yes, this stuff was intoxicating. I'm not proud. Eventually his wife figures out what we have going on. Starts talking me online in the MySpace era, and I have to change URLs a couple of times to shake her. He signed up to be a corrections officer since he couldn't get into the FBI, his dream job, and gets in. This is the first red flag I missed because, again, I was dumb. He comes over to mine and proudly tells me not only did he pass the psychological exam, but it was easy to cheat on cheat. I repeat, cheat on. He goes across state, then to train for 2 months. I nearly break up with him. He begs me not to. Then he nearly breaks up with me, and I beg him now on and on like this until finally he's able to come home, and this time, his wife gains access to his bank account and keeps draining it each month. She also comes by my work with their daughter in order to intimidate me after making sure it got back to me that she planned on kidnapping me, beating me, and leaving me on the roadside in the state south of us. So that was a thing, but finally he comes home. His wife kicked him out, or so he said to me. He doesn't have money for a hotel. So I asked my parents if he could stay with us. And they agree. He lives in my home, uses the washer, eats our food, and pays for absolutely nothing. In this time, he also begins divorcing his wife. His lawyer is a functioning drunk and takes what little money he managed to keep before his wife gets into his account each week. She's taken about over $18,000 at this point. So now he's staying in my house for 2 weeks, then back across state for 2 weeks, working doubles. It's when he's living in my family home I finally get to see his true colors. We've been dating 2.5 years at this point. His daughter is about 3. His mom and I are close, and I do shopping for her once in a while because she's sick and lives near me. But when he's home, he is just off. He says things, does things that keep setting off flags. Then I get trichomoniasis. If you're a fob and you've had trick, you know it's literally a living torture inside your body. If not, be glad and do your darndest to avoid it. Around this time, my ankles are swelling on and off, and I go to get everything checked out and got a pregnancy test. No results on the test. Doctor just doesn't tell me anything, but shoves me out the door and tells me my boyfriend is cheating on me. I can't believe it. I mean, why would he? We do it all the time. I was dumb. So the trike lets up. He's away at work, and life seemingly goes back to normal. 2 weeks later, he's back home. The trike pops back up. He gave it to me again, and so I'm back there to the doctors for more treatment and another pregnancy test. I asked the doctor this time, so, are you going to tell me my results? She was very dismissive and goes, yeah, you're pregnant. Turns out I was last time too, but now it's too late to take the pill. It wasn't. She only just told me that. Turns out I slept out in a daze, telling him idly as he's waiting there for me, and he's just thrilled I wanted to die. So we get home and I tell him, I don't want to have the baby. I'm 23 at this point, younger than my mom was when she had me, and I'm the oldest. I didn't have a job anymore because his wife stalked me into being too scared to leave the house, and I just wasn't ready. He tells me, listen, termination isn't an option. You have to have my baby. This is where the really crazy stuff starts. He tells me he always imagined growing up in the church that he would be the one to father, the one meant to kill the Antichrist, that his children would be kings, that he would be made a saint, etc. Me and atheists look at him like he just grew 3 heads. I tell him I cannot give a child up for adoption. Too many of my friends lived in or had siblings that had been in the system, let alone know something I grew and loved was out there without me. Then the answer's simple. We'll keep it. He tells me, so I tell him. Then the 2 weeks you're home, you change all the diapers since I'll be doing it when you're gone. He laughs and tells me that's a woman's job. I wanted to terminate it immediately. The next day he gets home from divorce court and he's painting and laughing and pacing, asks if anyone's home. They weren't. Then proclaims, "I chickened out. Chickened out." He then pulls from his big bag a shiv stabbing device fashioned from something else used in prisons as weapons, and he says, "I learned this from the guys at work," to which I ask the other CEOs. And he replies, "No, the inmates. He worked at a supermax facility, literally the worst of the worst our state had to offer. And he had made friends with actual serial killers I wanted to run, but was trapped in my own home for another 2 days with a man who had literally planned to kill his wife in the middle of court. I broke up with him that night but bent and promised that he could still stay with my family until he had money. 2 weeks go by, he leaves. I'm stricken unbelievably ill, and I'm spotting. I decide with my mom to actually go through the termination, and I make the appointment. I have to wait 2 more weeks because of the law. I've got 3 days to recover before he comes home and can assume anything other than, I just lost the baby. We go, mom walks with me, they do a psych exam. The shrink tells me I'm beyond prepared for this and that I'm making the right decision, based on my various reasons. Primarily not wanting anything to tie me to the psycho I just broken up with. I'm done. I'm home. I'm snarky on the Valium they gave me, and I sleep better than I have in all my life the next morning. Everyone is at work, I'm alone, and he comes back 2 days early. He tries kissing me, begging me, telling me how much he loves me and misses me, and how much I've broken his heart, begs me to sleep with him. I tell him over and over again, no, until all I remember is lying face down on the couch, my pants pulled down, him on top of me while I'm crying uncontrollably. He asked me what was wrong. I tell him that he just had his way with me and what he just did to me, and he just sits there trying to convince me that he didn't and couldn't understand why I was crying. I started locking myself in my room after that. So when I went through with it with the baby, it turned out that the fetus had died at 6 weeks and I was 15 weeks along. So for 9 weeks it was just rotting inside me despite the intrusive and violating internal sonogram they legally had to give me. I didn't manage to get a refund on that because they then classified it as an assisted miscarriage that said I needed a lot of help to recover from the hormones and other near-lethal chemicals in my body. So another doctor prescribed me medication for a disorder. I didn't have medication that made things even worse. The medication I was on at the time made me manic for upwards of 48 to 72 hours. Then I would crash and be dead asleep for 24 to 30 hours. On one of these occasions, I woke up with my ex's hand in my, let's just say he left with one less tooth after I kicked him off of me. I kept a chair wedged against my doorknob after that. The entire time my family was unaware he was a corrections officer, and I knew enough troop crime and statistics, even though to know nothing would happen if I reported him. So I lived in constant fear and anxiety, wondering what would happen next. Once on another medication, I nearly died, so I stopped taking anything, despite my family trying to convince me the medications were helping. My blood sugar was the cause of what nearly killed me. With the medication my family is trying to push on me, so I literally felt like I could not trust telling the truth to anyone. Then another night, I had traded spots with my ex, so he could sleep a little in the room, and I could spend time with my family, who kept telling me I was being mean to him, and she'd just get back together with him because he loved me. I remained silent and went back to my room the second I was done eating. Only I walk into my room, switch on the light, and my axe has sprawled in my bed. All of my dirty underwear he'd fished out of my hamper scattered across my bed and wrapped around his face. Tissues surrounding him. I cried all night that night and was inconsolable. The rest of the time he was there. He started partying with my friends, then going out drinking, and then coming home at 3 and 4 a.m., ringing the bell to be let in, waking the entire house and causing my parents to constantly scold me for his irresponsibility. Then my brother's sweet 16 came around and we had a huge party for him and my friend's brother. As they were 3 days apart, the boys got drunk. I sat by the basement stairs so I could escape. Well, my ex sat in the corner texting me. At one point, he asked if his new girlfriend could come to the party, and that's when I finally snapped. I collected all his things, threw them outside, and waited until we stepped out with my friend to chat while my friend smoked and locked him out of the house. Another friend of mine stupidly let him back in, unaware of what was happening, and I instinctively did the stupid horror movie thing and ran upstairs away from him. He chased after me, cornered me in my doorway, and was about to hit me when my older brother, army trained, stepped between us. My father came out of his room and demanded to know what happened. My ex started talking, but my brother interrupted and told my dad my ex had just tried to hit me, so my dad kicked his butt to the curb for good that night. Now you may think this is the end of the story. You're dead wrong. This was just the first hill of our roller coaster. So strap in tighter, it gets bumpy after this. So this was all around 2006. That following year, I'm at a little geek club that meets once a month. A couple friends are with me, and then there sat across from me as my ex, but he's not alone. He's with a woman 10 years my senior who had previously been obsessed with me and wanted to be me. She was so obsessed with being me. She started dating him, and he, wanting to get under my skin, wanted to make me jealous by being with someone I openly hated, but only managed to test my upchuck reflex. That was the day I told everyone what had happened and that he was dangerous. I stopped going to that club and never saw many of the friends there ever again, for fear that they would tell my ex about me. Skip ahead about a month or so, and he has his new girlfriend, the creepy old lady. I hate calling my phone from restricted numbers, leaving voicemails. My phone that they were going to murder me and to stop telling lies or I would disappear. I didn't leave my house, I stopped showering, so my parents wouldn't be able to drag me anywhere. I stopped living because I was so scared. Then the car showed up about a year after I'd broken up with him. A car kept appearing every night under my neighbor's streetlight. We couldn't see who was in it. Anytime we walked toward the sea, it would take off. No one ever left the car. We saw someone eating it atop the dash, rain and snow. It was always out there all hours of the night, and finally we realized why I have since I was about 17 and still do. It's a habit I can't break, no matter how much I've tried. And despite this next event, I couldn't quit even to save my life one night around January at 3 a.m. I was on the phone to my friend in Indiana. I had her tied to my head with my winter hat. It was snowing and I went out for a smoke. I stood by the brick wall beside our front door, lit my cigarette, and noticed a car creep onto my street. I lived 2 houses, and from the corner on a curve, I make mention of the car to my friend, then moved to the chair my father had set behind our large shrub, because despite the snow it was clear and dry. There was a foot of snow on top of the shrub, and our gas lamp set in the middle of our lawn. And were it not for these 2 things last night, I would not be typing this right now. The car creeped in front of my house as I gave commentary of it to my friend in a hushed tone. Then, as I said, it had better not. The car came to a stop right at the end of my driveway. I hushed my friend a moment and she laughed. Then came the bang. I heard it and a moment later felt the force of it hit my chest. He had fired his service revolver into the air when he could no longer spot me. I was silent as my friend, familiar with gunshots, screamed over the phone to find out what happened if she had just witnessed my murder. As I listened to him open his car door, pick up the shell from the freshly fallen snow, and close the door before peeling off down the street, I woke my parents. We called the cops. They told us they could literally do nothing, and any restraining order would only make it worse, and that despite him living literally across the street illegally from the police station, they could not remove his gun from his possession because it was a service weapon issued to him by the state and mandatory for his job. I lived in constant fear and paranoia for the next year. Then the calls started coming from this crazy person that he dated after me, begging me to speak in court against him because he had done terrible things to her, strangled her, and much worse, 3 other women were going to testify. She told me once he had put into the ICU twice that had been friends of the friends of mine he'd partied with. I declined. I couldn't handle it emotionally. I also didn't want to give him any more reason to come after me and try to finish what he'd recently bungled. It took me traveling across the country to see friends I've made online in the community that had helped me through all of this to finally stop being scared and start recovering. A few years later, I moved across country with my friend from Indiana. We lived out there for a bit before I wound up back home, and less than a year later I met my ex-husband. It was winter about 2013 or 14 when I got the most random call from my old friend Tom. A friend had died after a long fight with mounting illnesses. He understood what I hadn't come, why all the people there would only serve to upset me, they being the mutual friends of my psycho ex. Tom knew what had happened, was the only one who would believe me and has always been there for me before and since. So, after telling me about the service for our friend, he tells me I have some news, though I'm not sure you want to hear. I prepare myself and ask, and he tells me it turns out our former friend who staunchly took my ex's side and called me, and every woman he came into near deadly contact with, a liar, had some news for the group after the service. While they sat after eating supper, he informed everyone my ex was in federal prison. He had just been sentenced after about 6 months investigation and trial and would be serving 14 years his crime. He had answered a Craigslist ad requesting a man to turn out a woman's 12-year-old daughter, the woman being an FBI agent and the daughter not actually existing. They had him when he requested photographs of the girl, requesting certain images of this minor, but he went a step further, as he was apt to do, and crossed state lines when pictures weren't sent. Thinking the girl lived in Florida, he drove down there to be with her, and they caught him using his credit card at Disney World buying a tangled dress for the girl to wear while he had his way. I wept tears of joy that night. He has exhausted all possible appeals and been denied each time within the first year or two of a sentence. He still has half his sentence to serve and has been serving the entirety of it in solitary confinement, due to his former profession, and him now just being convicted for what he just did. My family still lives in that same house, as have I since my divorce in recent years, but hopefully within the next 7 years they will be moved away and safe. So when he gets out, he won't seek out further retaliation against me. He has been said to have openly many times proclaimed I was the reason why his life fell apart, not taking ownership for his own choices or actions, only getting progressively worse and more violent over the years. It still boggles my mind that anyone could be obsessed with me. I'm just some fat kid from the Rust Belt, poor and ugly, but then looking for logic amid insanity is a losing battle.